Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Mike Looney. I'm the Superintendent of Schools for Williamson County. And today at 1 o'clock, the State Department of Education released the state report card for last year's academic achievement. If you go to the website, you'll notice that the report card looks very, very different. It's received a makeover, and I think that's a positive for Tennesseans. It's a lot more data to look at, and you're able to dig and dive down into the data a lot more than you have in the past. There are two important things that I'd like to highlight today. First is Williamson County Schools received all A's in both academic achievement and in growth. And you can see on the chart behind me, the red A's are this year's state report card results. More importantly, if you look at how far we've come in the last 4 years, if you look at the 2010 results in the area of student growth, we didn't fare as well as we needed to. And we've been working with our teachers and our students and our families for the last several years to make a shift in that trend data. And I'm excited to report to the taxpayers and to the citizens of Williamson County that we've gone from D's to A's and growing all of our students. And so what that simply means is this, is that although most of our kids perform very, very well academically, in the past, they didn't make a full year's academic growth. I'm pleased to report now that in Williamson County Schools, not only do our students achieve at a very, very high level, but they also make more than 1 year's academic gain across grades and subject areas. So that's very exciting for us. A lot of people make the argument that your highest kids can't continue to grow, but Williamson County is proving that in fact we can have our highest kids grow at a very fast rate, perhaps even faster than most other school districts in the state of Tennessee and in the nation. So we're very, very proud of that. The second thing that I think is really important to highlight is that Williamson County Schools continues to widen the gap, accelerate the learning gap between the state of Tennessee and where Williamson County Schools rests. So while our achievement has for some time been far above the statewide average, the reality of it is that our learning path, our trajectory, is advancing faster than the state of Tennessee average. And we can go into some data points, but I'll use the ACT as a great example of that. Our average ACT score composite this year was a 23.4, and the state of Tennessee's average composite, depending on which data set you look at, is either a 19.5 or a 19.1 because there's some manipulation of the data that happens. But regardless of how you look at it, the reality of it is that Tennessee's schools made gains, but they didn't make gains at the same rate that Williamson County Schools did. So the news is good. We consistently are outperforming all of our peers. We look not only at Tennessee schools, obviously, but schools across the nation. We are part of a benchmarking consortium where we compare ourselves to the highest achieving school districts across the nation, and we fare extremely well, not only in Tennessee, but across the nation with schools that are similar to us. So with that being said, the data is so immense and there's so much there. We could literally spend hours talking about specific data points. So I've got my data expert, Mr. Kevin Deck, is our data analyst for the district, and he's just going to walk us through the state report card site, because that's the site that the public can access all of this information. It's pretty intuitive and user-friendly, and it's got a lot of additional information, once again, that we historically haven't had on the state report card. So I'd like to commend the State Department for expanding the richness of the data sets for the public to look at. So with that being said, Kevin, why don't you walk us through some of the data points, and when you're finished with that, we'll take some questions.
Very good. This thing just came live like 30 minutes ago, so bear with me, please. The first tab is something pretty familiar with from the old report card. It's a profile, but you'll notice there's a lot of fancy charts and pretty colors. A couple things we're proud of course, is our TVOS composites. You get a snapshot of how the grades are. The report card that Dr. Looney was just referring to is under the value added. This particular screen is for the value added for the state of Tennessee, and you can see the state of Tennessee A's and B's, but we have the ability to change to Williamson County. We can see recent history of the report card data. Dr. Looney mentioned that there were A's for achievement. We've had that for quite some time. One other thing to kind of point out is the actual scores in achievement have gone up. So even though we maintained the A's, we actually went up in the achievement level. We have our value-added growth scores. We had all A's but one last year, which we came a long way since 2010, all A's this year. And in most cases, the actual measure of growth got greater than last year.
Kevin, before you go down, can you go back up? I want to emphasize that point. If you look at the 2012 grades and then the scores next to them, that score is actually the number of students that scored proficient or advanced. And so you can see that while we've had A's in the achievement category for the last 3 years, the numerical score has gone up as well. So not only did we maintain an A, but our A's got better over time and across all subject areas, which I think is really important for a footnote.
That does concern grades 3 through 8. That's our TCAP achievement data. Down below, the 9-12, of course, those are measured on end of course tests and ACT. Those are the primary measures for high school, and we can see that for the most part, almost everything is above. It's in green, which means they've shown some growth. ACT across the board is pretty impressive. We did have a little dip in biology and English 1. I will tell you that biology was actually our greatest growth and achievement. In English 1, we had over 90% proficient and advanced. So those numbers are incredibly high in terms of achievement. So that's our snapshot.
I'd like to point out something there as well. You'll notice in the second column it says predicted score. So what that predicted score is, it's the score that the state thinks based on the history of testing that this cohort of students how they should perform. And then the one on the left is their actual observed score. So as an example, if you go to ACT Composite, you'll notice that the state predicted that Williamson County students, based on their history, should have scored a 21.87. And then you'll notice that the actual score that they reached on this chart says 23.54. Now, there's a little bit of you'll notice that there's a disparity. The 23.54 is actually a higher score than what's shown on the first page of the report card. And the reason that is because the state on the initial page of the report card, the state only publishes the most recent ACT composite, not the highest ACT composite. So if you have a senior that takes the ACT in November and scores a 24, and then the next 2 months later they take it again and they score a 23, then the state would calculate the ACT as a 23, not the 24. So if you looked at the highest, it would be a 23.54, but the way the state reports it is a 23.4. Sure.
How do you use this information?
Thank you for that question, because we very rarely get the opportunity to go that deep. And so we use it in 3 primary ways. First, we use it to recognize students and teachers for the hard work that they've done. The reality of it is there's not a program in the world that can accomplish these results. It's the result of hard work of teachers and principals and students and their parents. So we use this as a way of affirming the efforts that they've done. The second thing that we do is we use it to drive instructional decisions retroactively or for future cohorts of students. So as an example, we know that on the ACT, and I'll use the ACT as an area, we know that in the area of English, we can still grow a little bit. So we will focus professional development activities on how do we get kids to grow from a 23.4 to a 24.4 on the English section of the ACT composite. So all of our remediation efforts and our intervention efforts are geared to data points that we have collected. These data points being just one set of all of the data that we use. We use ACT composite, we use Explorer and Plan, and we also use our formative assessments in the district. And then the final way that we use it to decide how to use the limited resources that we have. Not only personnel, but the financial resources that we have. do we need to provide intervention and remediation? If so, in what areas, at what schools? Do we need to change staffing ratios at a particular school because the results aren't necessarily what they need to be? Do we need to make employment decisions based on results? At times the data points us to a direction that in school X, in classroom Z, we have 3 years of trend data where something isn't going right. Or the opposite of that, something's going extremely well. How can we learn from that teacher and spread her expertise or his expertise across other schools? So those are the 3 ways that we use that data.
The predicted score and the observed score. I think it's kind of important. Dr. Looney was talking about the ACT composite we had. You'll notice this number is different. They do calculate it slightly different than the number that's published from ACT. This really only includes kids that have a testing history with us, so that's
Right.
why that number is slightly different. I may have to drive from over there. Let's see. Oh, here we go. One of the new tabs is the college and career readiness. We'll pull that up. It talks about graduation rates and ACT data. One of the nice things they've added is how many students are hitting the ACT benchmarks, and they do some demographic breakdowns as well. We can see our grad rate, and I apologize, it's kind of falling off the screen, but
You can arrow it to the right so you can see a little bit. There you go.
we can see graduation rate 93.8 versus demographics. College readiness benchmarks, this represents all 4 categories, which is incredibly tough to hit actually. For a student to hit all 4 of the ACT benchmarks is pretty difficult. I believe about a third nationwide, a third of the students do that, and we are 40%. I think that's nearly double what the state does.
I think the state's at 19%.
Off the top of my head.
We'll look while you're here.
Actually, we could do that, yeah. Oops, sorry. Here are individual current scores, and there's the 23.4 that Dr. Looney spoke of a while ago. It is a little different than the value-added page, and in our 3-year average. There is a way to do comparisons under the comparison tab. We can see that Williamson County is actually number 1 in this past year, not only in composite, but actually in all 4 subject areas and in all the benchmarks, which I think is really kind of cool. The accountability tab, that's where our AMO information is. Well, let's get the comparison tab. Hopefully it's working. We'll see. The comparison tab is probably the newest function on the state report card, and allows you to easily draw comparisons between schools and districts and the state of Tennessee. So,
Can you just compare us to the state?
yes, sir. Williamson County and the state. You'll notice it will refresh eventually. There we go. We can see all the data for us. Is there a particular subject you'd like to look at?
Go to ACT. We've been talking a lot about ACT.
ACT test scores. So we can see the state of Tennessee, there's their 19.1 that's just the 1 year. For all our schools put together, 23.4. 3-year average, the state of Tennessee is a 19. We can see that we're a 23.1 for our 3-year average. Because I've selected all schools, we can actually go through and see all of the schools. Brentwood High School, 25.4 this past year. I believe they have the highest. And so you have the ability, and not only within our own district, we could actually look at some of the other districts and kind of compare the different scores.
So in summary, I'm sure that you're going to spend some time exploring the data on the website, and we're certainly very proud of the accomplishment of our students and our teachers and our families. I think we all the time ask ourselves, how are we producing the results that we're producing, and what is it that we can do even better? And while we're proud of the accomplishments that we've reached, we're not satisfied. We continue to want to do better. We have a specific goal of reaching an average composite of 24 in Williamson County, and I believe that we're well on the pathway to get there. I think it's also important to note, if you look at how Williamson County Schools is performing, both in the academic achievement area, but also in the academic growth area, and you consider that we are fiercely independent in Williamson County, as most of you know. We believe that we have a pretty good game plan to produce outstanding results for our taxpayers, And we believe it's because we've been able to insulate ourselves and focus on the Williamson County reforms that we believe are the best for our Williamson County students. And so we are proud of what we've done. We have work to do, and we remain absolutely committed to the local reform effort that we have engaged in. And we have had some great public conversations about both state reform and about local reform and how those two things interact or sometimes clash. And obviously we always prefer to focus on the local reforms in lieu of the state reforms, because we think that local decisions are in the best interest of Williamson County students. I'd be glad to answer any questions you have. I'd be glad to. One of the things that we did, if you go back to our growth scores, we weren't growing our kids in the area of reading as much as we wanted to. And so we developed and implemented a Williamson County Reading Initiative that's focused very explicitly on research-based pedagogy or the teaching of reading that has a primary emphasis on building capacity of teachers, growing them professionally. And if you take that reform effort, which has been very productive and has produced outstanding results, and you put it, or you consider it in conjunction with the new teacher evaluation system that we also implemented across the state of Tennessee, that process is summative in nature and doesn't have a professional development or building capacity. So in some respects, those two things don't work in harmony, and we've struggled with implementing the state teacher evaluation system model because it's summative in nature rather than our own internal model of building capacity of teachers by growing them, by building them professionally. What I want parents to know is that they should be proud, because these results are not the school system's results, it's this community's result, and our parents do a remarkable job. I also want them to be concerned because, once again, everybody kind of expects Williamson County to outperform other school districts, but the reality of it is the rate of our outperformance is expanding, growing, and so at some point in time we need to have the conversation about how is it that Williamson County schools continues to widen its achievement compared to the state. And our argument is it's all about local reform. Grassroots local reform works in communities because you have the buy-in necessary to be successful. And I honestly think that has been, if there is one thing that I could point to, it would be about local control and localized education reform, where teachers and students and community members have buy-in. If you look at the Ladders to Hope program that we implemented recently, what a wonderful example of a local reform initiative that everybody has buy-in. Students have buy-in, parents have buy-in, business leaders have buy-in, and it came from the ground up rather than from the top down. You're absolutely right. But I also know this, Williamson County Schools spends less than the state average per pupil as far as our total expenditures goes. And the reality of it is this: I have worked in an urban setting, Montgomery Public Schools, which is very similar to Nashville Metro. I've worked in a very small, rural, poor school district. And the reality of it is these type of reform efforts have been proven time and again to work across school, community, and culture. It's when you have buy-in from the ground level people, the people that are doing the work, the classroom teachers that are closing the door and day in and day out providing bell-to-bell instruction in a rigorous and relevant way. That's where we make the difference. And I think that's part of our success. Yes, the answer is yes. We certainly continue to make the argument that if it's not broken, don't fix it. We stand by our results, and if we don't produce results, we welcome accountability, we welcome reform, but reform doesn't happen in a vacuum. Once again, we have our own local reforms that we believe are producing really, really good results, independent of other reforms, state and federal government reforms. So we prefer to focus on the local reforms that we believe in and that we've created. The new state report card tells us that we're spending $8,400 per pupil. The state average is above $9,000. Franklin Special School District, which is our sister district, spends about $12,900 per student. And I'm not really sure what some of the other ones are, but obviously we're below the state average. But I don't want to be dismissive of the fact that it does take more money to educate kids from higher levels of poverty. And that's the reality. So I'm not dismissing that. I want to clarify the argument that people make. Well, Williamson County has all the money in the world. That they have 1 to 5 student-teacher ratios. The reality is we don't. Our money is extremely tight. We do a lot with a little. We have a little bit of an easier lift than other places. But overall, if you contextualize the things that we've done in Williamson County to create student improvement, those things are universal across districts, across size, across suburban, rural, urban. It really doesn't matter. Best practices that come from the ground up are the practices that the research says will stick and work for boys and girls. And I'll be honest, I really don't place a lot of value in the A, B, C, D ranking. What the value that I place is numerically, are the students making progress? And you can see that we've done well, but more importantly, how well we do has improved too. So I'm more interested in seeing kids grow from where they were than I am on a letter grade. The letter grade, I think, is primarily for public consumption because people can understand letter grades A, B, C, and it's just one of the things that we're accustomed to dealing with. But when you dive into the data, to know that your highest performing kids are making a year or more's growth, if that doesn't give you goosebumps, then you need to check your pulse. We're looking at all students, but we can certainly dive into subpopulation. I have on numerous occasions talked about our sub-pops. We are making great gains with our sub-pops as well. As you know, we took issue with a report that was issued by the state about how our Latino students performed on the last assessment. They actually performed better than what was on the report. But our students from different sub-pops are making great growth. The reality of it is, and this is startling in some ways, but if you look at the data as an example, can you find me the chart about how we are relative to the state with sub-pops? Is that easy for you to get to? Okay.
Is that all special needs, whether it's a physical disability or
excluding gifted?
Okay.
Yeah, but physically disabled or emotionally or mentally.
The light blue line is our special ed, and the orange is the state of Tennessee. This is for reading language arts last year.
So the orange line is all students across the state, non-disabled and disabled, their performance over a 3-year timeline, and the light blue is our students with disabilities. So you can see there's quite a big gap, performance gap, between our students with disabilities and the all students category.
Reading language, that's the green one.
All right, so the green bar is our students that qualify for free and reduced lunch relative to the orange bar, which is all students across the state of Tennessee. So our students that come from impoverished homes perform better than, on average, the traditional or the all student category. And then the same would be true of the
Ethnic group is
red line, which is Black, Hispanic, and Native American. So Black, Hispanic, and Native American students in Williamson County outperform the all student category, white students across the state. And the one area on this chart that shows that we're not performing as well as the all students category is with our Hispanic students. But if you compared Hispanic students in Williamson County to Hispanic students across the state, obviously we would be it's not even on the same playing field essentially, but when you compare it to the all students category across the state, they're very similar as far as achievement group goes. We've really put a lot of emphasis on closing the achievement gap with our subpopulations. We've implemented the RTI, response to intervention model. Our school level administrators have done a yeoman's job of providing differentiated instruction, extra supports for students with diverse backgrounds, and the data is really, really compelling. It really is. Very proud of them. Oak Ridge is the district that most people compare Williamson County to in Tennessee. And we can put a comparison up there, but to be honest with you, they're a much smaller district. And so, when you talk about, a lot of people will be surprised when you learn that Williamson County is actually a fairly diverse district when you consider we have very rural communities such as Fairview and Page. and then we have, Franklin, which is suburban. So we actually are a lot more diverse than most people think. But the reality of it is, most other school districts in the state of Tennessee aren't the size that we are, so they'll end up with 1 or 2 high schools. So it's really hard to make a fair comparison.
Right.
But demographically, Oak Ridge is considered, demographically similar to Williamson County. The Williamson County Education Association notified me that they were planning on doing that, and I asked them out of courtesy if they were going to do it to please give me the courtesy of a heads up, and they've done that. They did that, and then the timing of their vote coincided with the release of NAEP, and we mutually agreed that we wanted to be respectful of the governor's office and not take away from the good work that the teachers have done across the state by expressing their frustration. The reality of it is that Williamson County teachers, along with teachers from lots of other places across the state, have significant concerns, and it's not concern. I want to be real clear about this. It's not concerns about reform. It really isn't. I gave you an example of a huge lift that we did in Williamson County with the reading initiative. I can assure you that was a very painful process in Williamson County. Change is painful. But I think the difference is that the Williamson County teachers had a voice and were part of the dialogue moving forward about our education reforms locally. And I think that's the piece that's been missing from the teacher's perspective, from the principal's perspective, from the superintendency. I really honestly, genuinely believe that the department wants what's right for kids. I think it's about communication and about believing whether you genuinely believe that people doing the work have valuable and reasonable thoughts about how to improve their work. And I have found that when I include employees in the decision-making process to the extent that I can, that they're more willing and excited about doing the work. But the reality of it is that initiative is something that it's based on what the research says works, and it was we have always traditionally done very well in Williamson County, and so it was a huge shift for us to think, well, how can we make even our highest kids grow faster? And the teachers have accomplished that, and they are so good at their craft. It's remarkable. When I go to classrooms, I get goosebumps about the quality of instruction that I see. And they've done it. All I've tried to do is through the leadership team is to focus their work, to celebrate their successes, and occasionally give them a nudge if they need it. No, but I will tell you, the scope and sequence guides are another local initiative that we adopted to focus our work. And thanks to the vision of our school board, the board charged me specifically with making some academic gains. So we got together and we created a scope and sequence guide, which is essentially a roadmap. What is it that third grade math entails, and when are we going to teach it across the district? Making sure that whether you take Algebra 1 in the 8th or the 9th grade at Brentwood or at Summit High School, you get the same quality curriculum and instruction, a guaranteed viable curriculum for every child in Williamson County schools. And that was done independent of statewide reforms. But once again, when we're engaged in local reform, which is large and a heavy lift, and you add on top of that statewide reform, all of a sudden you have people that are overwhelmed and frustrated and can't handle it, and I understand that. So my appeal has been, let us focus on the local reforms that are producing results. Let's don't add more to the plate. And what's resonating in Williamson County, and I believe across the state, is too much too fast. And that's because I think that other districts like Williamson County are engaged in local reform initiatives to improve student outcomes. We all want the same thing. And so I think what either has to something has to happen. Either we have to set aside local reforms and just go with state reforms, or we need to have some ease of state reforms to allow for local reforms to grow and bloom and take hold. But right now you have those two things that are pushing against each other, and teachers are stressed out. They're walking away from their profession. They're having breakdowns. They're stressed out, and if the teachers are stressed out, the students are going to get stressed out, and if the students get stressed out, we're not going to be able to produce these kinds of results consistently. I do have two board members that are here, Rick Wimberly and Bobby Hullett. So if you want to ask anything from the board members' perspective, you're welcome to talk to them. And I have senior staff members. The lady to the right is Denise Goodwin, Assistant Superintendent of Elementary Schools. So anything elementary related, she can tell you. She can describe the reading initiative in great detail. Donna Wright is the Assistant Superintendent of High Schools and Middle Schools. And the Master of Ceremonies back there is Mr. Tim Gaddis. He is the Assistant Superintendent of Teaching, Learning, and Assessment. So he's the curriculum guy. He puts the maps together for us, and all we have to do is try to follow them.